Joining us now by Zoom chat is Jim Tui, founder and chief executive officer of Aging with Dignity, a nonprofit organization that he established in Tallahassee, Florida back in '96. And today heads its Washington, D.C. office. He also has a book out called To Love and Be Loved, a personal portrait of Mother Teresa, published by Simon & Schuster. Good morning to you, Mr. Tui.
Good morning to you, Joe. How are you?
Praise be to God. I am alive, and that counts. How are you?
I couldn't disagree more. What counts, of course, is the fact that you and I are together talking about the Lord and all the goodness that God shows us.
Amen. Amen.
And I agreed with what you just said, by the way, on the previous segment of your show regarding the need for us to stand up as we run to the 2024 elections and get serious about it. And so good for you for voicing that.
Praise be to God. Let's talk about Mother Teresa. This book looks very interesting. I have not had the chance to read it, but I was listening to several of your interviews on the subject, and it seems like there's some fascinating personal insight that we probably haven't heard elsewhere. She passed now. It was 1997. And I wasn't even Catholic when she passed, and I remember paying attention to the gravity of her funeral. Like, the whole world stopped to pay attention to her funeral. Can you just touch on that for a second? I mean, this is a Catholic nun in India that truly did impact the whole world.
She did, and I was there at that funeral, and to see the streets lined with hundreds of thousands of Indian citizens, Hindus mostly, many Muslims, very, very few Christians really that live in Bengal, to see the outpouring of love. She truly was a mother to the world. I said that at the time that she was the most Mary-like person since Mary, and that she was virgin and mother to the world. And I think the source of so much of the attraction about Mother Teresa was her motherhood, which is under attack today. So much of Mother Teresa's life is a reminder of the beauty of motherhood and its importance. When you hear people refer to women as birthing persons, to say that's a mother is an affront to the great dignity of the woman. And Mother Teresa, I think, witnessed that. That's why she was so outspoken about abortion. So the book tries to capture her humanness and tries to show through stories. I had the privilege to know her the last 12 years of her life, to travel some with her, to advise her. I was her lawyer. There were great stories in the book, I think, about how Mother had dealt with worldly affairs. So the book really gives a portrayal of her as a person and how she became a saint, not in spite of her humanity, but because of it.
How did you get to meet her? What caused things to line up that you ended up spending 12 years of your life as her attorney?
Well, it's a great story, I guess. The short story is it's the mercy of God, the kindness towards sinners. I was a very disgruntled and disaffected Catholic who was very empty life, but I had seen from afar this woman living her faith. So I tell that story in the first 4 chapters of the book, and also parallel it with a lot of Mother Teresa's biography to try to make the story interesting. But yeah, I went into Calcutta for one day to meet her, just because I wanted to see someone that was living the gospel. I wasn't, but I saw that she was, and it was a very brief meeting, tiny little woman who had such a tremendous focus. I met her the week she turned 75. She was so focused, serious. She was everything I wasn't. But by God's grace, I was in the right place at the right time because she needed a lawyer in the United States. She was opening homes for people with AIDS. She had immigration issues with her sister. So it all kind of came together, and I was smitten. I followed her like a little puppy dog from that point on, because I saw that she was the real deal, and I knew I wasn't. But by God's grace, she introduced me to Jesus in his disguise of the poor, and that visit to her home for the dying changed my life.
It seems like it's a common story among those who did get to meet Mother Teresa in person, that there was something that really attracted them to her, to the point where they found themselves doing things that they wouldn't have otherwise considered. And in your case, listening to you talk about this book, one of the first things that she got you to do was clean some man's wound out or something like that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I went to the home for the dying because she said, "Why don't you go there?" And I thought she meant get a tour. When I got there, the sister thought I came to volunteer. So she handed me some cotton and some solution and said, go clean the man in bed 46 that has scabies. And that's why, Joe, I can talk about it, because there wasn't the slightest part of me that went back to that bed for good purpose. I went because I was too proud to admit to the sister that I didn't want to touch the guy. I couldn't do it. I was too proud. So it was pride that got me started. And but by going back there, I ended up living in the home for people with AIDS. I worked in it 3.5 years, but I lived in it day in and day out for a year. And it was just a tremendous experience to see the beauty of Jesus in his disguise of the poor, to have the privilege to accompany men and women as they were dying. And they died very quickly back then. So those experiences, yeah. But going to you, you say you entered the church after Mother died. I think Mother's impact on people that never met her is going to be even greater. I just think that she has a real message to tell the world today about this primal need to love and to be loved, and that's more important than food and shelter. And I think the world needs to see it. We've got so much acrimony. You have a guy like Trump that's out there fighting, accusing, and we were made for great things, to love and to be loved, she said. And I think that needs to be rediscovered.
You said, quoting her, a life that is not lived for others is not worth living. And I think it's a great one-liner that I think all of us could learn to live. So I think this is one of the arguments I tend to make. I just gave us a parish mission in New Hampshire. I made this point, not quite as succinctly as this, and that if we're honest about ourselves, our goals in life are too shallow. I have 3 grandkids. What I want is them to grow up and be happy and successful, go to good colleges, live in nice houses, drive nice cars, have fancy friends. But the reality is that and a nickel doesn't get us to heaven. It's a little too shallow. Our outlook in the world is too shallow.
That's right. Well, she was, of course, a follower of Jesus Christ who led from below. He was there washing the feet of his disciples to teach them how to serve and to discover the joy of service and to be other-minded. The problem with our society today is people are self-centered instead of other-minded. And if you don't make that transition, you end up being a victim, a child. The whole infantilization that we see in colleges today, where they treat it as an extension of childhood instead of a passage to adulthood. These are problems in our society that aren't going to go away without a deliberate effort to discover the joy of serving, of giving, of loving until it hurts, of living like Mother Teresa did.
We're just about a minute to break, but you also said something about how she preferred she never allowed fundraising. She preferred the insecurity of God's providence to the security of a good, steady fundraising plan. You didn't say it like that, but I thought that was brilliant. We're gonna pause because we're out of break. I'm gonna let you answer it after the break. But
she did. She didn't want to rely on bank accounts and on steady annuities and so forth, like colleges endow themselves. She wanted to depend on God's providence day to day. She didn't ask for money. People gave money. I saw her turn down money. In her name, I gave back money that had been raised for her because she didn't want fundraising. So she really, truly depended from the day one that she went out into Calcutta streets in December of 1948. Then a couple women joined her, and then more. And by the end of that first year, she had 12 women with her living in this one-room space on the 3rd floor of a family home. That's how she started. You can just see that she herself depended on divine providence to go out and show her the way and how to serve the poor in the slums of Calcutta. It's an extraordinary story in the book about how this providence led to the Missionaries of Charity flourishing today. They're in 139 countries all over the world, and it all started with her taking that first step out into the slums of Calcutta. And now look at these sisters, courageous and bold all over the world. It's a beautiful testimony to the trust of God, in God and in divine providence.
I have on several occasions tried to interview one of Mother's sisters. They won't come. They won't come. They don't want the publicity. They don't want to be in the public eye that way. They are very simple women, of course, and they just want to do what they feel God has called them to do. I find that utterly fascinating.
Yeah, I've worked with them now for 37 years. And they're just remarkable women, and the priests, the men that I've gotten to know, the Missionaries of Charity fathers that are in Tijuana and all over the world too. It's a beautiful testimony that their lives are for Christ. And it's not that they eschew the kind of work you're doing, and thank God for the work you're doing in Guadalupe Radio Network and all the good that you do in spreading the gospel, the joy of the gospel. But their mission is to the poor, and they're single-minded and touching Jesus in his disguise of the poor, and following Matthew 25, that when were you hungry? When were you thirsty? And Mother used to take the hand of a person. I saw her do it to Janet Reno once and said, "You did it to me," and count that on the 5 fingers to remind them that this was to Jesus and it wasn't social work. And so that's why the sisters, I think, keep their head on and heart on the lives of the poor and this encounter with Christ.
And Jim, I was thinking about this during the break, and many times people would talk about the great Hitchens controversy, where he was criticizing Mother Teresa, and the atheists like to make hay of this quite a bit. I'd like you to give us a brief rundown of that situation, but also, and almost more importantly, I mean, who really cares what atheist blogs have to say about Mother Teresa? But more serious, though, are the accusations that come from Catholics. Many Catholics will criticize Mother Teresa and say that she held to religious indifferentism. Could you address those two criticisms of Mother Teresa?
Sure. And I spent a whole chapter on the critics and on Hitchens and on the standard stuff you see on the internet now. If you do a search and put in Mother Teresa critics, you see some really vulgar, but most of all, untrue things about Mother. Hitchens' claims that, she flew first class, so she was a fraud. The airlines begged her to fly first class. She didn't want to fly first class. In fact, she spent the first 30 years of her missionary life in India. She didn't even leave the country. So she was in third class compartments on trains, jammed into trams and buses. I mean, so the idea that she was some kind of jet setter was just nonsense. But Hitchens, loved to portray her as a fraud because he is an atheist, and that's his take on her. She wasn't indifferent at all. She felt God converted people, that she didn't convert anyone. So she loved Hindus, Muslims, anyone that God brought. She saw everyone as children of God. She was there to love them and to bring Christ to them, and through her service, through her loving compassion. And I think that those that were critics, they never do the work. Hitchens spent one day in Calcutta, and now he's an expert on Missionaries of Charity, And so I think Mother Teresa, I've been back to Calcutta 20 times. And when you see what these sisters do day in and day out in the streets, it's remarkable how they have put their faith into action and how it's having a changing effect on so many people's lives, volunteers, everyone.
One thing that I really admired about Mother Teresa was, and while I was in college, I read her diary. And when I read it, the one thing that struck me was when she was called by God early in her life, that she stayed faithful to that call. And I've learned that through the reading the great spiritual writers, that they say, when you make a decision in consolation, don't go back on it, especially when you go into desolation. And Mother Teresa really exemplifies that when she was felt called by God to this mission. And then afterwards, she never heard the voice of God directly ever again. Yet she stayed faithful to this very radical mission. Could you speak about that a little?
Sure. She had a darkness. I have a chapter in the book about the darkness that she lived, that was described in her own words, in her own pen writing, when she wrote letters to her spiritual director saying that she felt abandoned by God and forsaken by God. So after having these visions of Jesus, which Father Brian Kolodajczyk's book, Come Be My Light, has the letters themselves in Mother's own words describing them. Then God withdrew his sensible presence from her, and so she had to seek him in the darkness, and she did feel abandoned, and she lived what Christ lived, that, my God, why have you forsaken me? No one knew about this until after her death, that she had this darkness. We thought she had this rich interior life, that Jesus was giving her special consolations. And to find out that she, in fact, had the opposite, that she had nothing but aridity and a long, dark night, made me love her even more, because she did persevere. I was in her hospital room with her in Calcutta when she was in intensive care. And there she was in her bed, and directly in front of her bed was the tabernacle with Jesus present there in the Eucharist. She had an image of the Blessed Mother, Our Lady of Guadalupe, like the one Joe has behind him. She, directly in front of her, she had a little photo of the little flower there. Mother knew that she had come from God and was going to God. And so even though she had this darkness, she learned to find Jesus in the darkness, to befriend it, to accept it, and to trust that God had a loving purpose for it. So, yeah, I think that the critics that like to point out that, oh, she lost her faith, didn't understand her, because they don't understand faith, and they don't understand how the mercy of God and the tenderness of God works.
Let me tag into that for a second. So those critics that want to say that she didn't evangelize, that she simply was a social worker, I think is sort of the heart of their arguments. And yet you share a story about Hillary Clinton and how she interacted with the Clintons. This is one of the things that fascinates me about Mother Teresa, even back when I wasn't even Catholic at the time. She seemed to have an impact and an opportunity. God presented an opportunity for this humble woman with this leathery skin and meat hawk hands to engage with the most powerful and elite people around the world. And who is more powerful and elite than the Clintons, for crying out loud? Books and movies have been made about these people. So can you give me the insight when she met the Clintons? What was her relationship with Hillary Clinton in particular? What was she trying to do?
Well, she went to that National Prayer Breakfast in February 1994, and she gave this very strong speech in defense of life, saying that abortion was the greatest destroyer of peace in the world, saying that if someone didn't want the child, give them to her, she would take care of the child. So it was a very strong speech with President Clinton directly to her right, feet away from her. But afterwards, she met the Clintons privately, and Hillary cried in that meeting. And they talked about, let's work on opening a home for people for adoption, so to promote adoption and for children that could be placed into loving homes. And so they worked on that project together, and the house opened in June of 1995. So, and it really affected Mrs. Clinton. In fact, I was part of the U.S. delegation that went to the funeral for Mother, and Mrs. Clinton led that delegation. I was in the back of the plane with two of the sisters. And she came back there and she said, I never understood why Mother loved me so much. And she said, that she got a lot of hate mail from Christians. So to your point about how did Mother evangelize, every day she prayed this prayer. She said, let us preach you without preaching, not by words, but by our example, by the catching force, the sympathetic influence of what we do, the evident fullness of the love our hearts bear to you. This was a prayer she prayed every day. So she clearly was a great missionary and carrier of the gospel. And she saw that in some situations, words alone didn't suffice. Of course, she preached the gospel. Any speech I saw her give, she was preaching the gospel. But she saw with Hindus and Muslims and others that a very powerful way to bring the gospel to them was through her loving acts of service.
With Hillary Clinton in particular, it sounds like she maintained some kind of relationship with Hillary through correspondence over the years. And I think I heard you say that she asked others to pray for Mrs. Clinton. Do you think she was trying to convert her?
I think she loved her and saw God loved her and saw that this woman turned to her and trusted her. And so she befriended her. I think I can't judge Hillary Clinton's spiritual life and where she is, but I know that Mother had this impact on people like Princess Diana. There's a chapter in the book about how Mother had these different friendships, Ronald Reagan. So there were a lot of people drawn to her, movie stars, Julia Roberts, Penelope Cruz. They would seek out Mother because they saw in her an authentic messenger of the gospel, I think. I think they were attracted to Jesus in her. And I think that she recognized that God was using her in their lives.
We're getting down to the wire here. Let me ask you this. Mother seemed to physically suffer quite a bit over the course of her life. Yeah. Can you give us a sense of the extent of that physical suffering?
She was remarkable. She had 5 heart attacks. She had a stroke. She had malaria dozens of times. She broke her 3 ribs. She broke her arm. She broke her shoulder, broke her leg, had her head gashed, 19 stitches, bitten by a dog, had to go through the rabies treatments. You can go on and on, bad back pain. the book, chapter 14, covers the last 48 hours of her life where she suffered a great deal, enormous back pain. She took pain medicine and she offered and it didn't really work, and she offered all of her suffering to Jesus. So yeah, Mother was, she lived the way of the cross as well as the triumph of the cross. And it was remarkable how she never complained,
Wow.
and just loved.
Well, we're out of time. Jim Tui, author of To Love and Be Loved, a personal portrait of Mother Teresa, published by Simon & Schuster. You can find it at store.5wishes.org. God bless you, Mr. Tui. Thanks for sharing Mother Teresa with us today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Adrian.
Have a great day. Praise be to God. Coming up in the next hour, Hector Molina, the gospel and the game show. Go to grnonline.com/CDT. God love you and God bless you.